Have you ever wondered how a single teenage boy, armed with nothing but a burning vision and a handful of followers, could reshape the fate of Persia forever? Or how a mystical order of Sufi warriors draped in crimson and chanting the name of Ali would ignite one of the most powerful empires of the early modern world? An empire that dared to stand between the Ottomans and the Mughals? This is the story of the Safavid Empire, a tale of silk, swords, and a new dawn for Shia Islam. Picture the year 1501. The dusty streets of Tabriz are trembling under the march of soldiers clad in red turbans, the Qizilbash. At their head rides a boy no older than 15, his green eyes burning like wildfire, claiming the divine right to rule. His name, Ismail Fur. Within months he will crown himself Shah, proclaim Shiism the state religion of Persia, and defy empires that have stood for centuries. But how did this teenager rise from exile to found a dynasty that would rival Rome and reshape Islam itself? Stay with me, because the story of the Safavids is not just about power. It's about belief, destiny, and the birth of modern Iran, the boy who claimed a throne. The sun was barely cresting over the mountains of Ardabil when whispers began to spread. The boy is back. In the quiet heart of Persia's northwestern highlands, the descendants of an old Sufi order were stirring. The Safavids, once peaceful mystics, had evolved into something far greater, far more dangerous. They were no longer simply seekers of divine truth. They were believers in a prophecy that spoke of a child born to unite Persia under the true faith, the Shia faith, and restore the ancient Persian spirit that had slumbered since the fall of the great empires of old. That child was Ismail, born in 1487 into a world that was already on fire. His lineage was sacred, said to trace back to the Prophet Muhammad through Imam Musa al-Kadhim, but his path was soaked in blood. When he was barely 1 year old, his father, Sheikh Haidar, the charismatic leader of the Safavid order, was killed in battle by the forces of the Shirvanshah and the Ak-Koyunlu Turks. The boy barely survived. His mother fled with him across the wild Caucasian mountains, hunted by soldiers who feared what the Safavid heir might become. For nearly 6 years, Ismail lived in exile, hidden in the mists of Gilan by the Caspian Sea, growing up on stories of vengeance and divine destiny. But fate, as it always does, began to stir. By the age of 12, Ismail was not the frightened child of a fallen saint. He was a messianic figure to thousands of fanatical warriors. The Qizilbash, meaning redheads, for their distinctive 12-fold crimson turbans, symbolizing the 12 Shia imams, rallied around him with near religious devotion. They believed him to be a Murshid Kamil, a perfect spiritual guide, divinely chosen. Some even called him the Mahdi, the awaited savior. Imagine this moment, a teenage boy, pale from exile but burning with conviction, riding at the head of a ragtag army of nomads, chanting his name as if invoking a god. He had no formal army, no treasury, no royal lineage beyond myth. Yet he commanded faith so absolute that men would walk into fire for him. Their march began through the mountains and plains of Azerbaijan, a crimson wave of zeal and defiance. Their enemies mocked them, calling them madmen. But as the Qizilbash swept through the land, their madness became legend. In the autumn of 1500, Ismail struck his first blow, the Battle of Sharur. Facing the armies of the powerful Ak-Koyunlu Turkomans, who outnumbered him 5-1, Ismail unleashed a storm of courage that would echo across history. He rode at the front, his sword flashing, his Qizilbash screaming, "Ya Ali!" as if the heavens themselves were watching. When the dust settled, the Ak-Koyunlu were shattered. The boy of exile was now a conqueror. Months later, he entered Tabriz, the ancient capital of Persia. There, before his awe-struck followers, he crowned himself Shah Ismail I, declaring, "I am the shadow of God on earth." But Ismail's greatest act was not taking a crown, it was taking a stand. In a land long divided between Sunni rulers, he made a declaration that would change Islamic history forever. Twelver Shiism was now the official religion of Persia. It was a bold, dangerous move, one that would anger the mighty Sunni Ottoman Empire to the west and the Uzbeks to the east. But Ismail was unafraid. He was not just building an empire, he was forging an identity. In mosques across Persia, the khutbah, the Friday sermon, was now proclaimed in the name of Ali and the 12 imams. The Sunni call to prayer was replaced by Shia invocations. Coins bore the names of Shia saints, and for the first time in centuries, Persia was united not by tribe or language, but by faith. Yet as the crimson banners of the Safavids rose across the land, a shadow also fell. The Qizilbash, fiercely loyal yet fiercely independent, began to see themselves as more than soldiers. They were guardians of a divine revolution. Their zeal, once Ismail's greatest weapon, would soon become his greatest threat. But that is for the next chapter. For now, the world watched in disbelief. A boy king, not yet 16, had carved an empire from chaos and set the stage for a century of glory and blood. And deep within the heart of Ismail, I burned a question that would haunt his reign. Was he truly chosen by God, or merely consumed by his own legend? The Crimson Empire, rise of the Qizilbash, and the birth of a nation. Have you ever seen faith turn into fire, the kind that consumes empires? Or wondered how devotion, once pure and spiritual, can twist into a weapon that even its master can no longer control? When Shah Ismail took the throne of Persia at just 15, he didn't merely inherit a kingdom, he created one. His empire wasn't born in marble halls or ancient lineages. It was forged from the zeal of men who believed they fought for God himself. The Qizilbash, his crimson-headed warriors, saw him as a living saint, a divine instrument sent to purify the world. In the early days, their faith was their weapon, and Persia, fractured for centuries, began to beat again with one heart. Cities that had been ruled by foreign dynasties bowed to the red banners of the Safavids. From Shiraz to Isfahan, from Qazvin to Mashhad, the land that had long been a chessboard for Mongols and Turkomans was now unified under one name, Safavid Iran. Ismail's rule was not just political, it was spiritual theater. In the mosques, the names of the 12 Shia imams echoed through the air, replacing Sunni sermons that had dominated for centuries. In markets, poets recited verses that glorified the young Shah as a warrior of the faith. Painters captured him as both conqueror and saint, his face haloed with divine light. But behind the devotion, a storm was gathering. The Qizilbash were not ordinary soldiers. They were tribal warriors bound to Ismail not by salary or law, but by faith and blood oath. They saw themselves as chosen instruments, and Ismail as more than mortal. Some whispered that he was divine. When he rode into battle, they followed not out of duty, but out of worship. They fought with a frenzy that terrified even their allies. Their crimson turbans, with 12 folds symbolizing the 12 imams, became both a badge of honor and a mark of defiance. To the Sunni world, especially to the Ottomans, these red heads were heretics, rebels against the true order of Islam, and as the Safavid Empire expanded, it came dangerously close to the Ottoman frontier, a border where faith and ambition would soon collide. By 1510, Ismail's conquests stretched across Iran, into parts of Iraq and eastern Anatolia. His armies crushed the Uzbeks at Merv, driving their Khan from the battlefield in a storm of swords and dust. Persia had not seen such power since the days of Cyrus. The merchants of Venice wrote letters marveling at this king of kings, while Ottoman spies sent frantic reports to Sultan Selim III, warning that the Shia tide was rising, but victory came at a cost. The more Ismail triumphed, the more the Qizilbash believed themselves invincible. They claimed divine visions, executed local Sunni leaders, and imposed their beliefs with a zeal that turned neighbors into enemies. Even Ismail, who had once preached tolerance, began to see his empire slipping into fanaticism. Still, he pressed forward. Power, once tasted, demands more. In 1514, the inevitable happened. Two worlds collided. The young Shia empire of Ismail faced the mighty Sunni Ottoman machine under Sultan Selim, known to history as Selim the Grim. The clash came at Chaldiran, a dusty plain near the borderlands of modern-day Iran and Turkey. On one side stood Ismail, the divine warrior king, his Qizilbash shouting, "Ya Ali!" as they prepared for holy war. On the other stood Selim, cold and calculating, his ranks bristling with muskets and cannons, the future of warfare itself. When dawn broke, the air filled with thunder. Ottoman artillery tore through the Qizilbash ranks like divine punishment. Ismail, refusing to retreat, charged straight into the storm. His horse fell beneath him, struck by a cannonball. Bloodied but unbowed, he fought on until his army was shattered. Thousands of his followers lay dead. The legend of invincibility was gone. For the first time, Ismail, the man who had once been worshipped as a god, was defeated. The shock rippled through Persia. Cities mourned. The Qizilbash, once untouchable, now questioned whether their Shah was truly divine. Ismail, humiliated and broken, withdrew from public life. He drowned his pain in wine, a habit that would haunt him until death. The boy who had conquered empires at 15 now walked through his palaces like a ghost. Yet even in defeat, something remarkable happened. The idea of Persia as a unified Shia nation did not die. It solidified. For though the Ottomans had won the battle, they could not occupy the soul of the Safavid realm. Shi'ism took deeper root, shaping the very identity of Iran for centuries to come. But while Ismail withdrew, the world around him was changing. His generals, still loyal but restless, began to pull at the seams of his power. The Qizilbash tribes clashed among themselves, each claiming to be the truest defenders of the faith. Civil strife brewed, and Persia trembled once more on the edge of chaos. One night, as chroniclers tell it, a drunken Ismail gazed upon a portrait of himself, painted in the radiant glory of his early reign, and whispered, "The shadow of God." Cast by whose light? He turned away, his empire dimming with his spirit. But fate was not done with the Safavids. Out of the ruins of Ismail's broken faith would rise something even more enduring, an empire built not just on zeal, but on the craft of governance, diplomacy, and silk. His successors would learn that swords could conquer lands, but only trade and order could hold them. And so, as the century turned, Persia began to shift once again, from the battlefield to the bazaar, from divine conquest to cultural splendor. The next Shah would rebuild what Ismail had ignited, not with fire, but with fabric. Yet before peace could come, another question loomed. Could a dynasty born from divine blood survive in a world ruled by cannons and kings? The answer waited in the wings of the royal court, and in the silken hands of merchants who would turn Persia into the beating heart of a global empire. The age of Shah Ismail had ended. The age of silk was about to begin, but as the Qizilbash whispered in their tents, licking their wounds and dreaming of lost glory, a new shadow was already forming in the east, one that would challenge the Safavid soul itself. The empire had been born in blood. To endure, it would have to be reborn in silk. The silk throne, Shah Abbas, and the golden age of Persia. What if the son of a broken dynasty could turn ashes into gold? What if the boy who grew up watching his empire decay became the ruler who rebuilt it? Not through blood, but through brilliance. Half a century after Shah Ismail's fire burned out, the Safavid Empire was flickering like a dying lamp. His successors had inherited his crown but not his spirit. The Qizilbash, once the empire's lifeblood, had become its poison. Arrogant tribal warlords, more loyal to their own banners than to the throne. Court intrigues festered. Borders crumbled. The Ottomans pressed from the west, the Uzbeks from the east, and Persia, that dream of unity, was breaking apart. And in the middle of this chaos, in the cold corridors of Qazvin's palace, a young prince named Abbas watched in silence. He was only 16 when his father, Shah Muhammad Khordabanda, lost control of the realm. Blind, indecisive, and manipulated by scheming courtiers, the old Shah was little more than a puppet. Rebellions erupted like brushfires, provinces fell away, and the boy who would become Shah Abbas learned his first lesson. Power, without strength, is an illusion. One winter night in 1587, surrounded by loyal guards, Abbas made his move. His father was forced to abdicate, and the teenager ascended the throne, a crown pressed down not by glory, but by desperation. When the royal seal touched his hand, Persia was fractured, its armies demoralized, its faith uncertain. The world saw a collapsing kingdom, Abbas saw a chance to rebuild it from the ground up. He began not with armies, but with minds. The Qizilbash, still swaggering from old victories, expected another weak monarch they could manipulate. But Abbas had watched them for years. He knew their pride, their greed, their superstitions, and he would turn all of it against them, one by one. He stripped them of command, replacing their tribal warlords with new, loyal soldiers, men trained and paid directly by the Shah. To fill his ranks, he turned to an unexpected source, the golems, Christian captives from the Caucasus who were converted, educated, and trained in the art of war. They owed everything to Abbas, their lives, their positions, their new faith. And in return, they gave him loyalty untarnished by tribal feuds. The Qizilbash seethed. But before they could strike, Abbas struck first. In a sudden calculated purge, he executed or exiled their most powerful chieftains. The once feared redheads, whose ancestors had carried Ismail to glory, now bowed to the will of the young Shah. Persia had a new master, one who ruled not by mystic legend, but by design. Then came the turning point. In 1598, after years of careful reform and rebuilding, Abbas made a bold move. He shifted his capital from Qazvin to Isfahan, deep in the Persian heartland, away from the frontiers of war and into the embrace of security and vision. Isfahan was not just a city. It was a canvas, and Abbas would paint it with the colors of empire. Imagine the sound of hammers echoing across the plain, the smell of fresh plaster, the glimmer of turquoise domes rising beneath a desert sky. Within decades, Isfahan became a jewel of the world, wide boulevards shaded by plane trees, bazaars alive with merchants from Venice to India, and the great Naqshi Jahan Square, one of the largest in history, where polo matches and royal processions dazzled the eyes of travelers. The Shah's palace, the Ali Kapu, stood tall above it all, its balconies overlooking a city that pulsed with new life. From there, Abbas could see the empire he was shaping, silk weavers in workshops, calligraphers bending over parchment, caravans loading goods bound for the Silk Road. He had transformed Persia from a land of warriors into a land of merchants, artists and thinkers. Trade became his new weapon. Instead of waging war, he wove alliances with the English, the Dutch, the Portuguese. He opened new ports along the Persian Gulf and sent envoys to Europe, presenting Persia not as an isolated kingdom, but as a bridge between East and West. Silk, once a symbol of luxury, became the lifeblood of his economy. Under Abbas, Persian silk traveled from the looms of Isfahan to the courts of Europe, where queens wore it and painters captured its shimmer. The empire that had been baptized in blood was now wrapped in silk. But beneath this golden age, the old ghosts still lingered. The Qizilbash, though subdued, never forgot their humiliation. The Ottomans, though held at bay, never forgave their defeats. Abbas's reforms gave Persia strength, but also enemies who waited for his first mistake. And then came the twist. As Abbas grew older, his paranoia grew with him. He had seen how weak kings had fallen to betrayal, how even a father could be dethroned by a son. Determined to prevent it, he took a tragic step. He ordered the blinding or execution of his own heirs. His beloved son, Prince Safi Mirza, brilliant, courageous, adored by the people, was accused of conspiracy and put to death on the Shah's orders. The court whispered that the light had left Abbas's eyes that day. He who had built a city of beauty and reason had given in to fear. The very bloodline he had fought to secure was now tainted by tragedy, yet the empire stood tall. The roads were safe, the treasuries full, the markets thriving. Foreign travelers called Isfahan half the world. Painters, poets, and philosophers flourished under royal patronage. And though Abbas's heart darkened, his vision endured, a Persia of unity, prosperity, and pride. When he died in 1629, the streets of Isfahan fell silent. The people wept not for a king, but for the architect of their golden age. But time has no mercy for empires. After Abbas, his successors inherited his palaces, but not his wisdom. The silk trade faltered, corruption spread, and the Qizilbash began to stir once more. The same system Abbas had built to protect Persia would, in time, harden into the chains that bound it. For now, the domes of Isfahan gleamed in the sunlight. The streets thrummed with the laughter of merchants and poets, and the empire seemed eternal. Yet beyond the horizon, shadows gathered, shadows that would soon turn silk to ash, because even golden ages end. And the Safavid Empire, for all its splendor, was not prepared for what was coming next. Betrayal, invasion, and the slow unraveling of everything Abbas had built. The waning crescent, decline, intrigue, and the fall of the Safavids. Have you ever seen a palace built on silk begin to unravel thread by thread? Or watched an empire so grand, so magnificent, slowly lose its heartbeat? Not to enemies at its gates, but to rot within its own golden walls. When Shah Abbas the Great died, the Safavid Empire seemed untouchable. Isfahan glittered like a jewel beneath the sun, its domes reflecting a civilization at its peak. Caravans from India, Arabia, and Europe poured through its bazaars. Scholars debated theology under the colonnades. The sound of fountains echoed through the royal gardens like whispers of paradise. To the outside world, it was the height of Persian power, the rebirth of an ancient empire. But inside those walls, something vital was fading. The fire that had once driven the Safavids, the fusion of divine mission and royal strength, was burning low. The successors of Abbas inherited not his genius, but his fear. He had blinded or killed nearly every capable heir in his paranoia, leaving behind a dynasty of cautious princes raised in the shadow of suspicion. His grandson, Shah Safi, took the throne a frightened young man, insecure, volatile, and surrounded by courtiers who manipulated him like puppeteers. The disciplined state Abbas had built began to soften under layers of indulgence and intrigue. The Qizilbash, once reined in, regained influence. Corruption seeped into every corner of government. Ministers grew rich while soldiers went unpaid. The Ghulam army, once a pillar of Abbas's reforms, decayed without his guiding hand. And as the court grew decadent, enemies stirred like wolves, scenting blood. In the west, the Ottoman Empire recovered from its losses. In the east, the Uzbeks watched the Persian frontier weaken. And to the north, across the Caspian, a new power was rising, a relentless, expanding storm called Russia. By the mid-1600s, the Safavid court had become a theater of shadows. Eunuchs whispered in corridors, clerics competed for influence, and royal favorites rose and fell like the tides. The Shahs withdrew into luxury, their days spent among musicians and courtesans, their nights dulled by wine and opium. The empire, once a living organism, had become a statue, beautiful, motionless, and hollow. But decline rarely announces itself. It creeps quietly, one lost province at a time, one silenced advisor, one broken oath, and then, like a sudden crack in marble, it all gives way. In 1666, Shah Abbas II, the last capable ruler of his line, died unexpectedly, leaving the throne to his young son, Suleiman. The boy was gentle but weak, preferring poetry and pleasure to politics and war. His ministers ruled in his name, enriching themselves while the borders shrank and the army decayed. The great caravans of silk slowed. European merchants turned their sails toward India and the Ottoman ports. The lifeblood of Isfahan, trade, began to dry up. The empire that had once united mosque and marketplace was losing both faith and fortune. But it was not until the reign of Shah Sultan Hussein, beginning in 1694, that the empire's decline became a tragedy. Hussein was pious, devout, and tragically unsuited to rule. Where Abbas had balanced faith with power, Hussein surrendered power to faith. Under the growing influence of conservative clerics, the court banned wine, music, and many forms of art that had once defined Persian culture. Scholars who questioned orthodoxy were silenced. The vibrant intellectual life of the empire, once its pride, faded under the weight of fanaticism. And as orthodoxy tightened, the world beyond the walls changed faster than the Safavids could comprehend. New technologies, new trade routes, and new empires reshaped Asia. But Isfahan, locked in its own golden cage, did not move. The Qizilbash, restless and embittered, turned their loyalty toward rebellion. Provincial governors acted as independent kings. The once unified empire fractured along old tribal and religious lines. And beyond the eastern frontier, in the rugged mountains of Afghanistan, a new danger began to stir. One that no one in the royal court took seriously until it was far too late. The Ghilzai Afghans, led by Mirwais Hotak, had long chafed under Safavid rule. They resented Persian governors, the heavy taxes, and the forced imposition of Shia Islam on their Sunni tribes. In 1709, while Hussein's court feasted in Isfahan, the Afghans rose in open rebellion. They seized Kandahar, slaughtered the Persian garrison, and declared their independence. At first, the Safavid court dismissed it as a minor revolt. But Mirwais's son Mahmud was no minor rebel. He was young, ruthless, and hungry for vengeance. In 1721, he assembled an army and marched west, through deserts and mountains, toward the heart of Persia. In Isfahan, Shah Hussein's ministers debated endlessly, paralyzed by bureaucracy and fear. When they finally acted, their forces were disorganized and under-equipped. The Afghans crushed them in battle after battle. By 1722, the unthinkable was happening. An army of tribal rebels was besieging Isfahan itself, the city once called half the world. Imagine it. The great city that had dazzled travelers from Venice and Mughal India now surrounded by starving soldiers and desperate citizens. Its gardens wilted, its fountains dry, its bazaars silent. The palace walls echoed not with music, but with prayers and screams. The siege lasted months. Famine struck. People ate grass, leather, even the corpses of the dead. The once proud Safavid court fell into chaos. Ministers fought for power even as the walls crumbled. And in October 1722, after nearly half a year, Shah Sultan Hussein, descendant of Ismail, heir of Abbas, walked barefoot from his palace and surrendered his crown to Mahmud Hotak, the Afghan warlord. The Safavid Empire, the empire of silken saints, of poets and warriors, had fallen. Yet even as Isfahan lay in ruin, one question remained. Was this truly the end, or merely the fall before rebirth? Because history, like Persia itself, has a way of refusing to die. In the shadows of the Afghan occupation, a man of humble birth but iron will was rising, a general named Nader Qoli Beg, later known to the world as Nader Shah. He would swear to restore the Safavid line, to drive out the invaders, and to avenge the humiliation of Isfahan. But his rise would come with a cost, for in saving Persia, he would forge something even more terrifying. As dawn broke over the smoking ruins of Isfahan, the city that had once been paradise now whispered a single name, Nader. And soon that name would echo across continents, carried by the thunder of cannons and the march of an army that would make even the ghosts of the Safavids tremble.